Welcome back to the Complete History of Coffee, special episode, the Bataan Death March. Grab your favorite caffeinated beverage and let's get started. Today we have on Emily Knowlton to talk with us about the Bataan Death March and coffee in the Philippines in honor of the Bataan Death March. This is my friend Emily.
Hi.
Emily and I have known each other for most of our lives at this point. So she is Filipino and she wanted to do a special episode with us about the Bataan Death March.
Hi. Yes.
Hello.
So I have brought you coffee that is directly from the Philippines, I should say. And it is called Barako Gold. So Barako Gold is also known as Liberica coffee, which is
An African coffee.
It is, and it's supposed to be one of the rarest coffees in the world, or in the Philippines at least.
We're going to do this coffee as a pour over. So we have the pour over itself, and then we're going to put our bamboo filter in there. Okay, so typically you want to do about 2 tablespoons to every 6 ounces of water when you're doing a pour over. If you want it a little bit stronger, you can. So I am making this one just a little bit stronger. So we are going to start by wetting the filter, and then you put your coffee in. What you want to do is kind of go around the coffee in a circular formation, and you're just trying to get everything wet. Go about halfway up, and we're going to let that kind of brew for a minute. You can hear it brewing right now. We'll let that sit for a second, and then we'll pour in the rest of our water. So it's sort of like brewing it twice through. In the meantime, you want to tell us a little bit about coffee history in the Philippines.
The Philippines has a very rich coffee history. So it's one of the countries that are currently producing 4 varieties of the coffee, which is very rare.
What are the 4 varieties?
Arabica, Robusta, Liberica, and
Liberica. I'm just saying our
Excelsior.
listeners so that way they know I'm not trying to correct you.
Oh, no, it's fine.
Arabica, Robusta, Liberica, and what was the other one?
Excelsior?
I've never heard of that one, so
Yeah,
I can't correct your pronunciation if you were saying it wrong.
I apologize if I butcher
How is it
these
spelled?
names.
Just so we know how it's spelled.
EXCE LSA.
Interesting. Okay, I'll have to look into this at some point too. I didn't even know there was like a 4th one. I knew of the main 3.
Yeah.
Because obviously Arabica is kind of the main one, and the Robusta.
Mm-hmm.
I think they use Liberica, and you can correct me if I'm wrong if you covered this. Probably because of coffee leaf rust, I would assume it's probably more resistant to it.
Yeah,
but I don't want to go over your thing, so you go ahead. Give us the start. Set the scene for us. Coffee history in the Philippines.
So I don't know much about that. I do know about the coffee rust, but so in 1740, a Spanish Franciscan monk actually introduced the coffee bean, to the Philippines in Lipia, Batangas. And that province actually grew into wealth over the decades just because of that.
But it was the Spanish, because they were not the first ones there. So it's interesting that the Spanish were the first ones to bring coffee, though.
Yeah. Okay. And it's interesting because it's a monk, and that's supposed to be like a myth.
Well, like a lot of them got coffee from monks in a lot of the areas that I've been going over. As far as like colonial areas, be it Latin America or Asia, it seems like the monks love their coffee. They brought the coffee over. They
do. And isn't that kind of interesting? Because you would think that they would want something more of like, tea or anything
something
like that.
More chill. You have to think about a lot of them were praying or meditating and doing their monkly things at all hours of the night. And I don't know, they like their coffee. They got hooked. And I think if you think about it, it's probably better than drinking excessive amount of alcohol, because certainly during the medieval period, they were drinking in excess of alcohol.
The Philippine coffee history is very short. There's not really like much to it, rather than...
The coffee arrived.
Yeah, the coffee arrived.
What happened with it, though? We don't know. Did no one talk about that at all?
Not really. Like, they just said that, by myth, because nobody really knows how the Philippine coffee came about. They just said that it was brought in 1740 by a Franciscan monk, and then because of that, it grew into wealth in the Philippines. As the decades went by, there was a coffee rust that came
Oh,
through.
the coffee leaf rust. Dun, dun, dun. Do we know the date when that happens?
For it.
I assume that was probably like the late 1800s, early 1900s?
It's like late 1800s.
Late 1800s. Yeah, that's when a lot of Southeast Asia was getting hit.
So because of that, the Philippines became the world's largest coffee producer. And so
The Philippines became the world's largest coffee producer?
Mhm.
When was that?
That was like, let's see. So in 1880, it became the world's fourth largest exporter.
Oh, fourth largest. Yes,
Yeah.
because for a while there was other countries that overtook Brazil. I was like, I don't think they were the first though.
No.
Because there are a lot of other
Sorry.
countries in Latin America, and then there was specifically countries within Southeast Asia that grew a lot as a result. I was like, they became the largest though? I didn't know that. I just thought I would have come across that in my research. But
Well,
fourth, that's really impressive still.
During the 1800s in general, that was like the height of like the Philippine coffee industry. In 1880, it became the only source of coffee beans worldwide after the coffee rust hit Brazil, Java, and Africa. The Philippines actually lies in the equatorial zone, which is also known as the bean belt.
The coffee belt, yeah.
Yeah. And it's consisted of like 50 countries, and because it's in the bean belt, the Philippines is it has a very favorable climate, and the soil that actually consists of both the lowlands to the mountain regions. So that's why it's able to produce all four varieties of coffees. There's really not much more to the Philippine coffee history other than, modern day after the coffee rust, it was never able to actually recover. But that doesn't mean the want and the need for coffee throughout the Philippines has diminished. It actually has a
very large consumer.
Yeah.
What's this coffee called?
So this is called Barako coffee.
That smells pretty good. So I'm getting a little bit of earthy herbal. There's kind of some fruity though.
It really does. Like, what is it like? What do you think it smells like?
It smells like a berry.
Really, kind of.
What do you get? I mean, you can get something else.
It kind of like smells like cherries to me. The Philippines is also known for like having like really big cherries there that like
really?
grow alongside like the coffee. So
Interesting.
And that's in Batangas, and which is where this is grown. So
definitely a pour over. So you do a pour over, it's gonna make it I don't want to say watered down, but it's a much lighter taste than you might get from a lot of other brewing forms. It also makes it a lot more smooth. So I don't know if you're getting that, but it's like light, smooth kind of taste to it. It's not super bitter though.
It's not. I was expecting this to be like really strong. I mean, I could just drink it like
That's
this.
not too bad. I know you wanted to add like cream and sugar to it, and I was like, we got to try it this way first, and then we can determine. I might add just a little bit, but honestly, overall, yeah, no, it's a very smooth coffee. Obviously, if we might have done it like as a French press or something else, it might be a little bit more intense. But I get a light roastiness to it. There's a bit of a bitter, but it's a very smooth finish overall.
Usually I don't drink my coffees black. This is actually really good. I like the nutty and fruity flavor that you get.
There is almost a nutty, which is weird because it's Asia and not from Latin America, but I was getting almost a nutty from the smell. Not so much the taste. Maybe you're getting the taste. For me, it was more the aroma. There's some nut somewhere in there.
Yeah. Very different, I have to say. Like, this is very different from the rest of the coffees that I have ever tasted. Granted, I've never actually had coffee outside of what's produced.
Yeah, I'm like, I've never had Filipino coffee, so this is pretty cool.
I can see why everybody's like gets addicted to this really fast. Like everybody that I talk to, and I was asking my parents, like, hey, how is there like any special way to prepare this drink or prepare coffee? I have no idea how to say it, but like it's like that foamy coffee from South Korea.
The foamy coffee from South Korea? I have no idea. I didn't look at South Korea on our Asia episode.
Well, it's like modern day. It's like everybody has like their little whisks. It's like on TikTok
Oh,
too.
interesting. So more of a modern thing.
Like where they have like it kind of looks like a fluffy macchiato.
Okay, let's get into the Bataan Death March. So I guess I'll open a little bit on that for anyone who doesn't know. The Bataan Death March opened sort of World War II for the United States. Obviously, most people think of Pearl Harbor, but the Bataan Death March was happening very close in time, or at least specifically Japan's invasion of the Philippines and then the subsequent Bataan Death March. But I will let you go ahead and take it from wherever you want to start.
I'll start off by Pearl Harbor and the Bataan Death March, which is actually known as Bataan Death March. Like in the Philippines, it's actually Bataan, but we pronounce it
That's
Bataan.
how my new hairstylist said it. She's from the Philippines. And I was telling her that we were going to do this episode today. I just got a new haircut. So I went in and I was like, oh, we're going to do the episode. And then she was like, I was like, the Bataan Death March. And she kind of gave me this look. And then she said it the way you did. And I was like, yes.
Yeah, like everybody, the Filipinos, like when they hear baton, it's like, what do you mean?
It is interesting because there's two A's. Yeah. Bataan. That's interesting. It's almost like if there's like a little apostrophe in there or something.
The Filipino language, if you, it looks completely different from how it's actually spoken. So, like, it's bataan, but we're going to say it as baton because everybody knows it like that. After Pearl Harbor happened, there was a general named Douglas MacArthur who knew that Japan's next target was actually the Philippines. So that's why they all started heading over there. They were trying to avoid getting into the war, but because Japan bombed Hawaii. So yes. So I'm not too sure about all the details. I'm not really going to deep dive into the beginning of, how, after Pearl Harbor, how America got there. Douglas MacArthur and his team went over to the Philippines, and then they set up their headquarters in Carago. I'm not too sure if I'm pronouncing that wrong, so please excuse me.
It's in the Philippines, though?
Yeah. And I believe that's like the main part of like an island. But yes, they set up their headquarters in Carago, and then him and his team was fighting like for 3 months in the Battle of Bataan. And
like at the start, like when Japan was invading. Interesting.
So do you know why Japan invaded the Philippines?
Strategic importance? Screw the United States? I really don't know.
They were invading the Philippines because it was like the main oil producer between, I think it was like the Dutch East Indies, which is known as Indonesia today, and Japan. So Japan's all like, yeah, we're just gonna invade the Philippines for the oil. But yes, like, so Battle of Bataan, like,
how long did that last?
That lasted 3 months. And
yeah, because it started right around Pearl Harbor. And then the anniversary isn't until April 9th.
It started in January. And then after 3 months of fighting, what's it called? The transfer actually happened on April 9th. So that was the beginning of the Bataan Death March itself. But, the whole story behind it is always like, it always kind of intrigues me because of how, I wouldn't say like avoidable it was, but I feel like nobody really talks about the story behind it and to why it happened.
Yes.
So,
okay, so we're going to get into the story then.
Yeah. So the reason why the Battle of Bataan was only 3 months is because the Americans which was actually from New Mexico. A lot of the battalion was from New Mexico, from the National
Specifically
Guard.
National Guard. Do you know why?
I have no idea.
What language do you think people in the United States assume people in a place called New Mexico speak?
Probably Spanish.
What do they speak in the Philippines?
So the Philippines actually speaks 3 languages after their
But
colonial. So
Spain conquered them, so their
Mhm.
main language is.
it's Spanish.
But it's different. It is different.
Mhm.
You can't like speak straight Spanish to someone in the Philippines. They're gonna look at you like, "What? What?"
Yeah, like,
Like
and it's
someone.
very.
It's like someone in Spain and Portugal trying to talk to each other. It's kind of weird. Like
Mhm.
it's very similar, but it's also kind of different. But again, that's one of my point is I'm sure the United States was like, New Mexicans probably speak Spanish and they speak Spanish. Yeah, that's great. Let's send them over.
Yeah, let's just go, you know? Well, I mean, like, it's very formal Spanish too.
Oh, is it more like that Castilian?
Yeah.
Oh, that makes sense.
Like, everybody, if you were to speak Spanish to the Filipinos, like, at least the Filipinos I know, they're like, "Why are you speaking in so much slang?"
Oh,
Like,
that's
it's very
interesting.
formal over there.
Uh,
And
yeah.
then Spanish and Tagalog, which is the main dialect of the Philippines, it's very similar. So it's just kind of like, I feel like if you're gonna add some slang in there.
You said they have three main ones.
So it's English, Spanish, and Tagalog.
Oh, they speak English.
hmm
Huh.
It was like,
Is that because America colonized them for a while?
I believe so. Like, I know, I'm
Like,
not too sure
it's
about.
interesting. I just didn't know that.
Yeah, I think so because, you know, the Philippines is always it
They're
got,
always being conquered by
it's
someone.
always getting conquered, those poor people.
Might as well speak Japanese too, I guess. Yeah.
Japanese occupied like the Philippines from like 1942 to like 1945 until they surrendered. So,
Oh, they were in control of the Philippines throughout the whole war? I just
like,
figured at some point the United States was like, we want that back.
I mean, technically they didn't really like conquer the Philippines, but they were kind of messing everybody up
Oh,
for
shoot.
like, you know, like the rape of Nanking, like how the Japanese was doing all that, having all the atrocities there. So the Bataan Death March was actually compared to that, but nobody really
Um,
talks about it.
well, let's dive into the Death March itself then.
Okay.
Unless you had more to say about the battle.
The reason why the Battle of Bataan was cut 3 months into it was because Americans and Filipino soldiers, they weren't really prepared for Japan to invade. Like, they knew
Mm.
it was coming, but they weren't really prepared. So they had like no firepower, they had no manpower, they had no medicine, no like aircrafts to help them. They were literally just fighting the Japanese by themselves without like any reinforcements. So the people who were there, like the Americans and the Filipinos, they were like fighting tooth and nail for that territory that they were in.
Mm.
When the soldiers realized, hey, we're running out of supplies, we're running out of men, and we have no backup coming, General King actually went up to the leader of the Japanese Imperial Army, Lieutenant General Homa, and he said, yes, we surrender, because he thought the atrocities would end. It would probably be better off.
That would make sense.
hmm But
You would think.
you would think, but it actually worsened their whole their whole situation. And you know how like in the Holocaust they had like those trains to ship off prisoners to a certain
Mm-hmm.
death camp.
Mm-hmm.
So the Japanese were actually doing the same thing. They actually had camps, the prison camps of their own. But here's the kicker: this is why the Bataan Death March happened, was because those trains were 65 miles away from from Bataan, which where they were at. They were trying to march the soldiers. So there's not a confirmed number, and they don't know how many died, but the estimated is like 5,000 to 18,000.
So what was the total number before?
I'm not too sure. Like they
That's a
just
lot to die. So I'm just wondering like how many might have been there before. Wow.
70,000 prisoners. That's
I didn't
approximate.
know they had that many people
Yeah,
to begin with. That's a sizable force.
it is a sizable
Because
force.
I assumed there were some casualties during the battle before the Death March. How many people did they have? They just needed better equipment, I guess. They needed some more guns and
They needed
planes and tanks.
preparation. That's what they needed. They needed preparation.
Yeah. Oof.
There was 9,000 soldiers that were from America approximately, and then there was 60,000 Filipino soldiers throughout the whole Bataan Death March. It was 5,000 to 18,000 POWs that died.
Okay, that's also like a wide spectrum. Like Japan didn't take good records. They're like, it was about a dozen thousand. I don't know.
When you look this up, it's not as detailed as, the Holocaust in Germany was,
Oh
or
yeah,
like
because
the
they
rape of.
wanted those records. They wanted to know. Japan was
Mhm.
like, yeah.
Well, the Japanese don't even recognize that they did the atrocities in China and in Bataan. They don't recognize any of this, and I'm like, what do you mean? I have a family member who was actually part of the Bataan Death March. I was never able to hear the stories that he had from it, but he never told anybody about what he witnessed and what he went through. From what my family says is that he was a really good street fighter when he was younger before that even happened. And then when the Japanese invaded, I guess he just used those skills that, as a survivalist. He told their mother, so my great grandmother, and she was saying that he witnessed friends dying, and all these other things, but she never really told anybody what he said. But he did have a drinking habit right after, like he didn't let anybody come near him
So
afterwards.
potentially probably some like PTSD and other things.
Hmm. I've heard some pretty crazy stories from the Philippines from my grandmother and my grandfather, but like particularly my grandmother, because she grew up or I grew up hearing all her stories. So while her brother.
So she was alive during that time, right?
Hmm. So I believe she was like 12 by the time the Japanese invaded, the Death March happened. And she had, I think she had about like 9 siblings
Yeah.
and stuff like that. And her brother was the one who went into the Death March while she was at home in her province.
Yeah.
And she was telling me how the Japanese actually flew over her provinces and were trying to shoot her down because she was wearing a red dress in the forest, and she was holding her 5-year-old nephew on her back. So a little 12-year-old with a 5-year-old running from these aircrafts, like
That's
shooting bullets down.
terrifying. My goodness.
And they really hunted like everybody during that time. Like, the soldiers who were going through the death march, they were being, raped, they were being beaten, they were being beheaded if, they caught a soldier who was dehydrated. They had malaria, they had just all these kinds of illnesses because, the Philippines is a tropical place. So, from one account that I was hearing from a soldier who survived, he said that the temperature was actually 108 degrees, I believe, plus the humidity. And the Philippines has like mosquitoes and like all these things in the
Malaria.
yeah, all these crazy things in the jungles. So like
So do you know if the American soldiers got treated any different than the Filipino soldiers?
oh no, they
Like, was
just
there a little bit of racism towards the Filipinos at all?
as
Or they just treated everyone equally just bad?
from what I'm seeing, like every time that I'm reading it, they were more focused towards the American soldiers because
Or they were
the
like more specifically mad at the Americans for being there?
I want to say they treated everybody equally bad because
Oh, I
they
see.
just didn't really care.
Yeah, they're just
But
all prisoners at that point.
yeah, they just saw them as like disposable human beings. So like
Mm,
anybody who was falling, anybody who couldn't like keep up,
I
or like
see.
whoever was like crapping their pants and throwing up because they had all those diseases and sicknesses. Like there was people like walking with bullet wounds, and they never got treated for it. And then you know the soldiers were just the Japanese soldiers just like to pick it on everybody. But the accounts from the survivors, I haven't really seen like a Filipino survivor come out. Like from my research, it's always like the documentaries that I've seen are always about the Americans.
Interesting.
So that's coming from their perspective, but I'm not too sure if one demographic was more hated than the other.
Mm-hmm. Was there a lasting legacy then?
Uh,
You're talking about because
yeah.
it got brought up within your family every now and then.
Oh yeah. Like,
But like, think about like growing up in New Mexico. Yes, I learn about it in school and it's relevant, but we don't talk about it. We're not like, oh man, that dang Bataan Death March. But it sounds like maybe there's a lasting legacy for some Filipinos.
there are, just like how we are here, like how America doesn't really talk about it, or anybody really talks about it. Filipinos don't really talk about it all that much. There's things dedicated to the Bataan Death March here, particularly in New Mexico, because
Well, yeah, I can imagine it can be sort of like the like Pearl Harbor in many ways.
the trains that they were trying to march everybody to, that was actually at Camp O'Donnell. That lasted for 65 miles. Between, I'm not too sure.
65 miles is quite a bit to march through a
Mhm.
tropical environment, I imagine.
And those 65 miles, like depending on where a soldier would like join in on the march, because I think they picked up straggling, like the little stragglers along the way.
Oh.
So from what I'm researching, it was 5 to 10 days for the 65 miles, and then they had no drinks, no food.
Oh, that's several days to not really have anything to eat or drink.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And then like you're already sick, and then you're wounded. Your friends would get shot if they were caught helping you. Douglas MacArthur was actually, we see him as the savior of the Philippines. He actually left the Philippines during like the beginning of, the war, because when everybody ran out of supplies and men and all this other stuff, Teddy Roosevelt, which was the president during that time, actually ordered MacArthur to leave.
Teddy Roosevelt would have been during the early 1900s.
Franklin? Well, Roosevelt during the
Franklin.
time.
There you go.
So Roosevelt like ordered Douglas MacArthur to go to Australia during that time. And he actually declined because he didn't want to leave his soldiers. He didn't want to leave the Philippines to just, suffer
For themselves.
Yeah, he didn't want them to suffer, because his dad played a really big role in the Civil War and stuff like that. So he took his military life and military career very seriously. Roosevelt offered him, like, hey, if you leave now, then whenever you come back, you can have control of a certain company, like in the military. So that's why MacArthur agreed to leave. But he told the Filipinos, I shall be back. And then he kept his word, and he came back in 1945. And he was the one that actually stopped, like, the invasion of the Philippines. He got together with Roosevelt and a man named Charles Nimitz, and then they made up a whole plan to invade the Philippines. I believe Nimitz and Roosevelt were against the idea at first, but then he's just like, no, we're going to do this plan. So then he actually led the invasion into the Philippines. So they actually got the Imperial Army to surrender to them.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. So, and he's the one that I was talking about, that actually was able to disband the Japanese Imperial Army right after the war.
Okay. That's cool.
So,
Hopefully you enjoyed this special episode. Next time, we will be getting back to our main story as we talk about coffee in the First World War. This show is written and produced by me, Era Zaffer. If you have not already, please consider supporting this podcast series on Patreon. For the price of a latte a month, you can support this and future projects in the series. Make sure to join our community on social media at the Complete History Podcast Series. If you would like to contact us, you can do so through our social media or at our email, completehistorypod@gmail.com. Don't forget to subscribe on whatever platform you're listening to this podcast on, and make sure to share it with your family and friends. Thanks for listening.